and a great history of running Dungeons and Dragons groups specifically. So he's an avid gamer and autistic individual himself, and he is going to share some of his experiences struggling with neurotypical socialization. And please just everybody welcome Peter. And Peter, you have the floor.
All right, well, thank you. Struggling with neurotypical socialization, that is a story that a lot of us have gone through. So kind of my whole spiel with this talk is that, you know, the struggle is real, and there are ways to kind of see it in a more nuanced way. So this is my talk on rethinking social skills programs by really kind of centering autistic communication and friendship. So jumping right in, the agenda, I'm going to be talking a bit about my own experience as autistic, kind of growing up and figuring out, you know, how different it was when I started embracing more autistic-centered socialization, rather than just trying to fit in with a bunch of neurotypical people, and how that changed my own life, and how that kind of led me into doing the work I'm doing now. Then
Peter?
I'm going to be talking about utilizing gaming specifically to kind of run these social skills groups, and then how to use that kind of platform to start developing autistic centered social skills.
Peter, when you're ready, go ahead and share your screen too.
Oh, it's not sharing? Oh, Lord.
No worries.
I was just wondering, like, where's the share thing? I thought I was sharing. All right. All right, now can you see it?
Yep, you're all set now.
All right, cool. So just as an aside, I'm going to be talking a lot about gaming here, because that's what I've done the most work with. However, a lot of these things can be kind of generalized to a lot of different types of groups. So I've run primarily gaming groups, but I have run some other types of social skills groups, you know, kind of theater things, etc. And I think everything that I've learned here can be generalized and can be used in other things. So jumping right in, a bit about me. I've been autistic my whole life. However, I found out last year. When I was a kid, I was diagnosed in like first grade with ADHD, primarily the inattentive variant. And I think a lot of people didn't think, you know, he's really struggling to pay attention whenever he's in a really busy classroom with a lot of people making noise and really bright lights. So really what was happening was a lot of sensory struggles were making it really hard for me to focus, but I ended up with the ADHD label and the ADHD toolkit. You know, people recommending I try this or do that, or, you know, go on Ritalin or whatever. And where this didn't really help was with any sort of like social skills that would be really applicable to an autistic individual. So I kind of grew up really kind of struggling, and it was really rough. But last year, a friend of mine, or well, really 2 years ago, a friend of mine said, "Hey, Peter, I'm an autism specialist. I think you might be autistic. Please go get tested." And I did. Turned out I was autistic, and it absolutely changed so many things, and how I started perceiving myself, how I started really thinking about my own autism and my own social history, and where things had gone really well for me socially, and why it was really important that I did make autistic friends. So I've been using tabletop gaming and video games in various contexts for about 11 years, ranging from kind of foster care groups to therapeutic groups to autism social skills groups to education groups. You name it, I've either done it or I know someone else who's doing it. So I'm really, really passionate about the idea of using both tabletop gaming and board gaming, or in video gaming, to really do specific things, whether that be, you know, teaching physics, or, you know, promoting self-advocacy, or, you know, doing a physical fitness routine. So I think gaming is a really useful tool. So I'm incredibly passionate about figuring out how to do this. And my kind of bread and butter has been working with neurodiverse clients. So super passionate about that. My educational background, I have a bachelor's in psychology from the UW and a master's in education focusing on curriculum design from the UW Tacoma. And I am just personally really, really enthusiastic about trying to create a better, kinder world for autistics. I realized that for a lot of us, the world is not a very pleasant place. It's not designed for us. A lot of these social situations that we encounter are kind of not very pleasant for us. So I think that there is a lot of work to be done in really understanding how autistics socialize and having autistics lead that conversation so we can make a better world for other autistics, and hopefully have other neurotypical people listen to us and understand our perspective. So all that stuff super important for me. So going to talk about why gaming. And again, I think a lot of these things are really generalizable to other types of groups, but I like gaming. I'm an avid gamer myself, but I think gaming is a really, really useful tool because there is a very high number of autistic gamers. It's a very popular hobby, and you look at video gaming and board gaming, and it's just chock full of autistics. So it's kind of a low barrier to entry. Whereas if I were to try to run maybe a rock climbing group or something like that, the barrier to entry and the interest existing in the autism community might not be as high. So that I think is one area where it is just very low barrier to entry, and I think that's super helpful. Next, gaming creates a structured social activity with fixed norms. So I'm going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. That's the one I use the most. In Dungeons and Dragons, you have a character sheet which tells you all the things your character can do. And there are kind of fixed things that you can do and you're expected to do. So okay, my character's in a dungeon, he can move over here, he can cast a spell, or he can try to do this thing or pick a lock. So everything is really kind of overtly transcribed and prescribed in this fashion. I think for a lot of autistics, having social ambiguity is really stressful. Having kind of this framework and having this count as valid social interaction is really nice, because you can still have fun with friends and you don't have to really worry about doing the wrong thing as much, because it's all kind of on the character sheet. Another real big strength of the gaming community is, gaming's huge right now. And there is community everywhere, thanks to the internet. You can kind of find your people. I'm a huge fan of this one super esoteric game that was made in like 1989. It's like my little special interest. And I found fans who are still into this game all over the world. And it makes me so happy because I have people that I can geek out with this about. So I think that's one of the really nice things about gaming is there's so many online communities where you can kind of find other autistics, where they're info dumping, you can info dump, you can kind of geek out and not feel ashamed about your special interests. So I think that's a real strength of gaming. Another thing is that it's a social activity that can be done from anywhere. There are online platforms where you can do like Dungeons and Dragons and board games and stuff like that. And then, video games can be done from home as well. And I think that's really important because for a lot of autistics, having to socialize in a space that is really busy and really loud and really chaotic can get really unpleasant. Being able to have socialization and hanging out with people and friendships while being able to stay in an environment that's really comfortable for you, I think lowers the stress of that friendship. And so I think that's really, really important as kind of an accessibility thing. And then also, it's super, super personal to me. I am not lying when I say that D&D saved my life. So I'm going to tell a little bit about me and my kind of nerdy history with D&D. So these are two pictures. And, I'm the guy second to the left with the Dare shirt. on the first picture, and then the Hawaiian shirt in the next. And these dudes are the oh, there's a little heart. These dudes are my D&D party. The woman in the middle is actually married to the guy in the red shirt. I think she's taking the photo in the second one. But in middle school, I had no friends. I tried to fit in with the neurotypical kids so hard, and it was just painful for everyone. I tried to play football. That was awful. I just couldn't do it. And then one day I was in detention, I think for breaking the dress code or something. And the kid in the red shirt who's carrying a foam sword sits down next to me and starts talking about Space Marines. And I'm like, wow, I think I have a friend now. And then next thing I know, I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons with him. And years and years and years later, we're still playing Dungeons and Dragons. We're still playing board games. We still hang out to this day. And I'm going over to his place tonight to probably watch Star Trek or something. And we're still super close. We still play a lot of games, but we also support each other. We also are there for each other. We're able to, have each other's backs when things get really rough. I know whenever I need to talk to someone about stuff that's stressing me out, I've got them. There have been times in my life where I've been really, really struggling, and they've been 100% down to hang out, play some games, listen to me vent about stuff. And after I got that friend group, I was no longer lonely. It would be a stretch to say I was happy, because I was still an autistic in high school and, still struggling with a lot of things, but I had people to talk to and people to share all that high school drama and also those struggles and, support me throughout all that. So gaming helped give me this sense of community. And suddenly I went from being someone who so dearly wished he had friends to having an adventuring party of fellow geeks who I could go play all these adventure games with and feel really, really supported. And so as an autistic who was feeling really alone and scared in the world, this saved my life. And this really inspired me to go on to find out how I can do this work elsewhere. So I use Dungeons & Dragons specifically to teach social skills. D&D is not the only game out there that is being used therapeutically. I know Game to Grow, Seattle-based organization, has their own game critical core, but D&D is definitely the one that is the biggest. And for those of you who don't know, Dungeons & Dragons is an adventure game. It's kind of this shared game of make-believe with hard rules. So there's someone called the Dungeon Master, and they kind of tell the story. They create the situation. They will kind of say something like, okay, you are approaching Castle Darknar, and you see in front of it there is an ogre. And then the players, who all act as one character in the world, have to go kind of discuss what they'll do. And it's usually set in like this sort of Lord of the Rings fantasy-esque setting. So one character might suggest, oh, we should, try and attack this ogre. Another might be like, well, let's try and talk with him. He might be friendly. Another might be like, well, we have these invisibility potions. Let's just go invisible and see if we can sneak past him. So the party, discusses what to do, and then they decide, okay, let's do the invisibility potion or something. So they're sneaking around, and then one of the parties trips over a twig or something, and suddenly the ogre's looking for them, and they have to go figure out what to do next. And there's dice and rules and all this stuff. So ultimately what it is, cooperative make-believe with rules. But there is a huge amount of lore behind it. There are scaling levels of complexity for people who like a ton of rules or don't like a lot of rules. And it's super, super popular. And right now there are a ton of therapists using it. Not just in autism. It really kind of got its start in the autism world, but there are people using it for like trauma, for grief, for empowerment groups. So really just a lot of exciting stuff happening. So kind of my start in it, I kind of stumbled into this field by accident. I was working in the foster care world, and I had a friend who ran a gaming store, and I decided, it'd be fun just to run these like 4-hour single shot D&D, fully encapsulated adventures. You finish it in 4 or 5 hours. And so I got his permission to run these at his store, and I started running them. Next thing I know, there are all these foster parents and foster kids coming to these groups. And the foster parents would come up to me afterwards and say, "This is incredible what you're doing. My foster son never ever hangs out with his foster sister." And they were sitting there and laughing and playing for 4 hours. I've never seen that. Or my foster son, never smiles. He never laughs. He was giggling, pounding on the table, raising his voice, getting super into it. Thank you so much. You brought some joy to his life. And I'm just sitting here being like, wow, this is really, really cool. There's just something to this. And so I approached the game store owner and say, like, so what's with all the foster parents? He tells me, oh yeah, I have a bunch of foster care friends, and I just told him you were running foster care groups. And I'm like, what? I never said that. Why did you say that? But there was also this wonderful aha moment where I realized this is something that can be used. So as fate would have it, I met Dr. Rafael Bocamazzo, who was running some autism groups in the Bellevue area. And we became quick friends, and he actually hired me on to help him start running autism groups. And since then, I've been running autism groups all over Pierce County, King County, in different contexts for different agencies. So just been doing it all over the place, and it's awesome. And really kind of the social skills angle is, it's super easy because you can use this game that's super accessible to autistics to teach masking. And when I say masking, I don't mean like COVID masking. I'm referring to, autistics presenting as being neurotypical, doing neurotypical social skills stuff like making eye contact and all that fun stuff. But through this game, there is incentive. It is a fun sandbox for masking. So in a lot of traditional kind of social skills groups, you're presenting as yourself. In this game, you can be presenting as your character, who can be whoever you want. So a really good story about this was, I had this one kid who was like this all the time, would be looking down, would barely talk. And we spoke a bit, and he decided he was going to make this really gruff Scottish dwarf with this whole like blood-soaked backstory, and he was super grim and angry. And so I remember I was playing with the kids, and it was a murder mystery, and they were trying to track down a witness, and finally they find the guy, and he doesn't want to talk, and he's super nervous that someone's going to go after him. And suddenly, this kid playing the dwarf looks up at me, takes up half the table, is holding his like dwarven axe, and says to me, "All right, listen here, Sonny. You best listen to the elf, or you'll be dealing with me, and you won't like that at all." And I was just like, oh my goodness, this is beautiful. Immediately was able to give him a bunch of dice bonuses that allowed him to immediately, intimidate the guy into spilling the beans. The rest of the table was just like, that was awesome. We need you to talk more. And as the sessions continued, he would start going into this sort of Scottish dwarf mode where he'd take up half the table, be holding the axe, his voice booming. And I started hearing more and more that he's started to speak up in class more. He's becoming more confident. And I think the reason for that was because he didn't have to mask as himself. He was able to explore masking through role-playing as this angry Scottish dwarf and kind of, dip his toes in and to being a really confident, loud person without having to really jump in as his full identity. No, he could just kind of explore this. And it was amazing. And I've had so many stories where I convince, really quiet kids to go play really boisterous characters. And there's all this incentive where I can say like, oh yeah, you should totally play this, super loud barbarian, because check it out. He gets 12 hit points every level. Easy sell. So it becomes this wonderful, playful sandbox. And there are really powerful motivators for things like teamwork and communication. So for example, I could say, okay, there's bandits coming. You guys need to come up with a plan to avoid their ambush. Suddenly, teamwork becomes essential, but at the same time, the stakes are very low. So it is very high motivation, very low risk. Because the worst thing that can happen is, oh, your character might get hurt, and they know that I don't kill characters unless they explicitly tell me their character wants to die so they can go make a new one. And usually I try to retire characters anyways, but it becomes this very kind of high motivation, low risk, very fun oriented space where they can explore a lot of these neurotypical social skills. And there is absolutely incentive because you want to survive the bandit ambush. And then there's also some really cool space for kind of perspective taking, where you can kind of say, okay, I know that you would probably shy away from this case, but would your character? And then, a kid begrudgingly, no, my character is super angry or super loud and boisterous, so he's gonna go in and, become the life of the party. And, it really is a balancing game. You gotta know, what kids' comfort level is and how to kind of challenge them, but it works really, really well. So, so I was running these groups, and then COVID happened. And we were looking at going to Zoom because we had to do remote groups. And one of the kids said, hey, can we do Discord? And so we were able to switch to Discord. And for those of you who don't know, Discord is a chat app that has kind of a desktop version and a smartphone version. And it was really cool because this is what the kids selected for their space to socialize, and it created kind of a space offline, or well, not offline. It was still online, but not in the game time for the kids to start hanging out. And so that was really, really cool. And these were a bunch of autistic kids that were already on Discord, so it was very kind of low barrier to entry. They were all like, oh yeah, I can join the server, no problem. And I have an autistic co-facilitator. She is a former student in one of my groups, and when she aged out and started going to college and studying psychology, this was actually prior to my diagnosis, I was like, you know what? If I'm running an autism group, I want an autistic person helping me run this group. I think that's super important. So I hired her, and she's been incredible. And she has been super helpful in kind of keeping an eye on the server and really normalizing a lot of autistic, communication and just kind of info dumping and geeking out and celebrating it and just trying to really combat any shame and stigma around autism. So absolutely so proud of her. She is a wonderful co-facilitator. Something that I've found is really cool is Discord uses what's called channels, and they're like these little chat rooms where each one has a topic. And I think for a lot of autistics, there's a lot of a dislike of social ambiguity, but knowing that, hey, this is the space where I talk about spells. This is the space where I talk about projects I'm working on. This is the space where I can share cool art. That kind of helps them keep a good understanding of what the topic of conversation is. It's kind of cute. They'll actually kind of self-police a little bit, say like, hey, I think this topic should go here. And they're like, oh yeah, that's right, that's right. So it's really, really kind of awesome. And then there is a lot of gaming functionality built in. Kids can kind of stream games to each other and use it as a way to game. And it actually got to a point where I was having parents call me and say like, hey, my son's staying up till midnight playing games with one of the other kids from the server on a school night. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't aware. And they're like, it's really not a bad thing because he's never had friends. So it's sad that he's up till midnight on a school night, but this is great. I'm like, okay, cool. And honestly, a high schooler staying up till midnight playing video games with a friend is pretty kind of normative behavior, but it's just been really, really cool to see. And then also kids can info dump at their leisure. I think that's a really, really useful thing. because I think sometimes when someone's info dumping, it can be really overwhelming. But if it's over chat, it's like 3 pages. Kids can, read it whenever and get back to them whenever. And it's resulted in some really, really, multi-day conversations about particle physics, or some super esoteric rule in D&D or some video game, and it's really, really neat. So as I'm running these D&D groups, my co-facilitator is keeping an eye on them, and I started noticing that the kids were starting to advocate for each other. And really this started when one kid said, "Hey, a teacher made fun of me for being autistic." And it was like watching someone kick a wasp nest. Suddenly all the kids are like, "Okay, here's how you do this. Here's how you, contact the council, let your parents know, tell them to do this." So suddenly all the kids are just stepping up with advocacy tips to help, address this very serious problem that had happened in the school that the kid had disclosed to our group. And the kids just completely led the way on this. And it was really, really just amazing to see. And another time in the span of a week, one kid came out and the response was like, "Oh, cool." And then like 3 more kids came out. And it was just, "Oh, cool." And just kind of having that just very chill, accepting, we're not gonna make too big a deal of it, just, good for you. Made a space where kids felt really comfortable to come out of the closet. I think that is really, really important. I think, we need to do a better job of, creating spaces like that. So I felt just very honored that they felt safe enough in this space to do so. So that was really cool. I also saw the kids writing social skills, their social manuals for each other. So I had this one kid who would get super upset at me because I wouldn't give him all the magical items he wanted. And so every week he would want, a sword that could cut through anything, or wings so it could fly, or, other things that would absolutely break the game. And if I gave it to him, it'd be super unfair to everyone else. And so he's kind of getting annoyed, and I was gonna, have a conversation with him. But then another kid just jumps in and writes this essay saying, like, "Look, Peter wants to tell a story, and he wants you to be part of the story, and he wants things to matter in the story, and he also wants everyone to be part of the story. So if you really want something, stick with one thing and ask him how it can become part of the story that everyone can engage with." And so the kid actually decided, "Okay, I want this one thing, and I want the story to be about that." I was like, "Okay, yeah, that's gonna happen in 4 sessions. We will have that arc." And he was able to have that whole thing happen, and it became like this really, really like pivotal moment in the campaign. And he was able to learn this because another kid was able to really just get on his level and write an essay. So that was just really, really cool. And I started to see kind of what I call autistic joy. And when I talk about autistic joy, I think, within the narratives about autism, there's a lot of tragedy narratives that kind of cast autism as, a cautionary tale about vaccination, or, this thing that ruins families, or this thing that needs to be cured. And within autistic spaces, you see a lot of, trauma, and that's valid. The cautionary tale about vaccination stuff, I hate that. That's awful. That creates, something that no autistic can look at and feel good about themselves. The trauma stuff, I think, is valid. It's important to acknowledge that, living in a neurotypically oriented society creates a lot of trauma. And I know that I grew up with my fair share of it. But I think, a key important thing to building resilience is creating those moments of silver lining, those moments of joy that can be shared, that can be celebrated. And I started getting to see that through the game. So a story that I love to tell is about this character that I was running as the game master, dungeon master, storyteller. He was called the Stabber, and he was obsessed with knives, and he's kind of autistic coded, I think. Not intentionally, but afterwards I'm like, yeah, he kind of is. And he's just this super knife obsessed dude. And he was sorting all these knives in a perfect line based on how long they were, and just making them look really cool. And then one kid was like, oh, I want to see what happens. Will he be able to see a knife that's made with an illusion spell? So he cast an illusion spell that created some illusion knives. And then the stabber goes and adds them to the pile. And then the spell ends and the pile's messed up. Or the sorted line is messed up. There's gaps in it. And suddenly all the kids are just like, oh no, what have we done? We're bad people. And they're laughing. And then, joking about how they just feel the worst and they messed up a sort and they hate when that happens. And, acknowledging that they all feel awful and ultimately sharing a moment of empathy. Existing in a world where people are constantly saying, oh, autistic people aren't empathic. Oh, absolute empathy there. And they had such joy in their shared empathy because that was a moment where they got to have empathy and got to really express that and celebrate that around their autism. So love it, love it, love it. So as this advocacy went on, I started seeing friendships happen. As the kids kind of started being there for each other, they started really bonding and hanging out outside a group, going to each other's birthday parties, going to concerts together, inviting each other to events, and, spending all this time talking with each other. And I started seeing my own childhood there, how I'd gone from being lonely and having, a single friend that I hung out with on weekends who didn't go to the same school as me, to having people in my school who I could talk to whenever I wanted to. And I saw that with them, and I saw them building their friendships on their own terms with various, like all kinds of different things that they would do together. One common thing I saw was that gaming was really central. Whether that was, Dungeons and Dragons, of course, or, streaming video games or playing video games together. And I think one of the silver linings of COVID is that took away a lot of the screen time demonization that was really existing about 4 or 5 years ago. Once screen time became school, I think a lot of people were like, okay, maybe we need to rethink how bad this is. So I think parents started acknowledging that, hey, kids playing video games together counts as socialization. I think that was a really good thing that allowed kids to do pretty well. And then I started hearing stories from kids multiple times, multiple kids saying, before this group, before all this happened, I didn't have friends. I was lonely. I hated the world. I don't feel that way now. And then just them thanking me and me just saying like, dude, it's you guys are doing all the work here. I'm just creating this little space. But knowing that I was able to take the path that had worked for me and kind of offer that path to some other kids and see them forming similar friendships meant the universe to me. Because friendship and growing up lonely, it's super important. You look at the suicidality rates for autistics, they are so much higher. And I think such a protective factor, and especially personally, is having community, having people you can talk to, having that safety net, whether that's people you can just vent to when you're feeling down, or people who can maybe pitch in $100 to help cover rent, things like that. So super, super important.
Peter, I just want to give you about a 12-minute warning here. Want to make sure you're able to get through all your slides. So we have about 12 minutes to get through slides and ask questions.
Okay. So how do autistic friendships form? Right off the bat, they don't look like neurotypical friendships. So whatever you think a neurotypical friendship looks like, forget that. It's going to be doing its own thing. Do not have any expectation of masking. Some kids might want to mask, some kids might mask for fun, but drop those expectations. Realize that there are no role models in media, or very few role models in media for autistic friendships and autistic social things. And also not a lot of social activities are autistic friendly. It's stuff like going to the mall, or going to a concert, or going to a dance, going to a sports game. Super loud, super stressful. So realize that some of these things need to be dumped. If you create a space for it, they will they will occur organically. I think that's super important. And kind of a big piece there is them becoming advocates for each other. I think that is how they build that trust, is when they see each other going to bat for each other. That's kind of a, okay, this person has my back. And I think a really, really key piece of that is learning how to navigate each other's neurodiversity. And this can mean some compromises, and this doesn't mean like every autistic kid can be compatible with each other. A kid that is really loud and has stims incredibly loudly is going to have a really hard time with a kid that has some big sensory issues. But being able to find where you can kind of make those things work is really, really critical, and a really important way to do advocacy. So how do you facilitate this? Right off the bat, realize that there may be a lot of unlearning that needs to happen. A lot of kids may have come from social skills groups where they're expected to be doing masking. So kind of acknowledging that, hey, you can kind of, this isn't necessarily, and kind of modeling that you can just kind of be who you are and exist in this chill space. So kind of helping them unlearn some of that stuff. Sometimes autistics will just immediately get on each other's wavelength and just jam, and it's awesome. Other times, it is a social skill, and there needs to be some facilitation there and guiding, and kind of help them learn those things. So it is really important to recognize that this is still a skill. Right off the bat, be inclusive, welcoming, and open. Just really, really model that and make that central to who you are. If you're autistic, say you're autistic. Model that through self-disclosure. Share autistic-focused media. Usually that's like super esoteric things that kids like. And then center the autistic experience in a really celebratory way. And lastly, super important, hire autistics. And the reason I believe this is, I'm a huge believer in nothing about us without us. I am so fortunate to have my co-facilitator. She is wonderful. She is really, really sharp. And I think that, I've made the absolute best decision of my career in hiring her. And yes, she needs accommodation sometimes. She, needs me help. And I'm 100% willing to do that. So you hire autistics, but you provide them with the accommodations they need. And acknowledge that they have their own strengths. They be really strength-based when you're hiring an autistic. Give them the ability to use their strengths to their advantage. A good example is that a lot of times autistics will notice things that neurotypicals won't, especially about other autistics. And throughout my career, I used to work for an intensive mental health services agency. I regularly found that I was picking up things with autistic clients that no one else was noticing, and they didn't feel comfortable disclosing, or were just so overwhelmed they couldn't verbalize what was happening. I would just see, oh, well, all these three things are happening. Maybe we need to do all this in another room or something like that. Also, having autistics there can be really powerful for modeling advocacy. So many autistics have had to advocate for themselves their entire life, and can be really good at teaching that and normalizing that. And ultimately, I think autistics belong as leaders in the field of autism services. We just do. There's such a history of really, really awful experiences that have come out of autistic treatment and services and whatnot. And I think by putting autistic voices in leadership positions and really respecting them, I think that is how we make this better. And then I think for kids, it's really essential to see autistics in positions of power and authority, and have things that fight against the role model that says, oh, if you're autistic, you'll either be a programmer or living at home forever. No, you might be running a social group, and that's awesome. That's so cool to see. So finally, I just want to acknowledge that I talk a lot about autistic social skills. This is not to say that neurotypical social skills are worthless. No, both are important. Being able to mask well can help you keep a job and be able to pay rent. So it is important to be able to do that. But being able to have a friend group that is not stressful to be around, where you don't feel this pressure to mask, where you can be your weird autistic self and have people who get it, that's so absolutely critical. So I think we need to be looking at both sides of this, and ultimately I think by doing this is how we raise the next generation of autistic advocates who are going to change the world. So real quick, I'm going to put my contact information. I'm Peter J2 at uw.edu. You can find me on Twitter at Roll for Kindness. I talk a lot about D&D, autism, all this stuff. I also write a lot about using games for good at rollforkindness.com. So with that, questions?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. We have a few minutes, so if anyone has any extra questions, drop them in the chat now. I will also share that Peter's links are available on his speaker bio, if you guys want to take a look at that later today. And all of his links to his Twitter and other accounts are there. So definitely check him out. Peter, we have a question from Sarah, who said, do you know of any online resources that link neurodiverse gaming or other groups? Living in a rural community, it can be hard to find groups in person.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the groups are still online. So if you're looking for online groups, I would probably recommend like someone like Game to Grow. They have a lot of online groups, but the in-person stuff, it is a good question. There is actually an organization that does trainings called Geek Therapeutics, and also Game to Grow does trainings where they actually train psychologists and therapists and stuff how to do RPG groups, and they actually have a database or a list of people who have graduated from those programs, and a lot of them go on to start including D&D work into their practice. So might be worth it to reach out to them, see if they've got any groups in the area. But if you're willing to do online, there's a lot of stuff there as well. But I completely understand that online is very difficult, and a lot of kids are kind of burned out of the online stuff.
And Peter, you said that was Peak Therapeutics?
Geek Therapeutics.
Geek Therapeutics. Okay, I will look for that chat. I will look for that link and drop it in the chat for everybody. Also, question from Gnome. Any suggestions for helping youth who aren't interested in gaming finding shared interests with neurodiverse peers?
So that's kind of one of those things where a lot of this stuff can be applicable outside of gaming. So talk about the Discord thing. I worked with one kid who wasn't into gaming at all, but he was super into big semis. And he found some Discords of other people that were obsessed with big semis and was able to find those online communities where he could kind of geek out and just really get along with people. And I think with a lot of these super special interest communities, you have a lot of neurodiversity in there. And so again, looking for your community online can be a really good way to find your people.
Awesome, Peter. Well, that is the only questions I've seen in the chat. I just want to add for folks living in the Lewis County area, if you're interested in social programs sponsored by the Autism Coalition, I dropped my email in the chat. It's info@lcautism.org. We have a social group for adults that meets monthly in person and has an online Discord channel. And we do seasonal activities for youth as well. So Peter, thank you so much. That was an awesome presentation. If any attendees are interested in downloading his PDF, it's also available on his sponsor bio. Otherwise, Peter, I see lots of rounds of applause for you. Thank you again so much. And for attendees, we will see you in the next session.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.